Good morning. Everyone have a good Thanksgiving. I gained, I think, 4 pounds on Thanksgiving. It was a good day, right? I was proud of myself. And then I got like an awful sinus infection from all of the wind, and it's so dry. So sorry, my voice sounds so scratchy. It's like I feel fine, but got a like sinus infection for like a week because of the weather, all the changes, and now it's going to be cold, and we have some rain. Right? Exciting, and we only have a couple of classes left. It's wild if you're looking at our syllabus. So Thursday is December. Right, so we have today and Wednesday, and then Monday and Wednesday, and that's it. So we have this week and next week, and we're done. So we're definitely kind of down to it at this point, which is exciting, but it's also a little sad. It always makes me sad at the end. Like we have a nice like dynamic, and then we end, but it's always a little sad. But winter break is nice too. So we'll look forward to that instead of being sad. But what we'll cover today is we'll start chapter 17, and then we have this one, and we have one more afterward, which is chapter 18, which is selling sex, looking at pornography and prostitution. But we'll look at what's kind of a difficult topic today. We'll talk about power and sexual coercion. So things like rape, sexual assault of children, sexual harassment, and intimate partner violence. Definitely not the happiest and easiest or lightest of topics, but an important one to cover nonetheless. So that's kind of our plan for the next few days. We'll have this one, and then 18, and then we'll take our final, which will just be a third exam online. And then on Wednesday or Monday, I'll talk about, there's a little closing assignment that I'm giving you where you have to reflect over a couple of topics from the semester. I'll talk about that probably on Wednesday, just to make sure you know what that is. It'll be due next week. Instead of giving you a cumulative final, I have you kind of reflect back on 5 things that you can kind of take away from the class or apply to your life, which I think is much nicer than a cumulative final. Cumulative finals are the worst, so I won't give you one, and I'll talk about that a little bit on Wednesday. All right. Are there any questions about anything related to like the schedule or kind of what we have coming up, anything like that at all? I did grade all of your homework assignments, so those have all been graded. This is a good chance to start looking at your score on Canvas. Just make sure everything looks correct. If you're missing something or something looks wrong, this is a great time to tell me about it, rather than once I submit final grades. At that point, it's really hard to change. So maybe over the next week or so, take a look at Canvas, make sure everything looks right, and let me know if something doesn't. Yeah. So it's everything since the last one. So it's chapters 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So it's the last, everything since exam number 2. And I'll give you a study guide. It's actually already up on Canvas if you want to start preparing. It's on there. And it'll be open note, open book, and online, just like the other tests. But definitely a good idea to prepare for it. But anything else for now? As one last side note, I said to check your grades. If you never turned in assignment number 1 or 2, the homework assignments, you can still email those to me for half credit. Half credit's better than no credit. So if you didn't turn those in and you have regret, you can still turn those in to me for half credit at any point this week or next week. So just to kind of put that out there. Otherwise, as I said, we'll talk about chapter 17 today, looking at sexual coercion and violence. And I imagine a lot of you, unfortunately, know somebody who's been a victim of some kind of sexual violence. Unfortunately, it's relatively common, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But when we're talking about coercion or violence, this is when a person is deprived of their free choice, right? So they're coerced or forced to comply with some kind of sexual acts under threat or under duress, maybe some kind of violence. Sexual violence specifically is an act committed against somebody without their consent. So we'll talk a lot about consent here in a moment, but this is against somebody's will. We talked about paraphilias that were illegal and against somebody's will. This is when you're perpetrating some kind of violence against someone without them agreeing to it, right? Or forcing sex upon them, or we'll talk about sexual harassment a little bit as well. There's a lot of different things that fall into this category. And again, not the happiest or easiest of topics, but still an important one to talk about. So we'll talk about a couple of different types, and we'll start with talking about rape or sexual assault. And again, if you know somebody who has been a victim of this, that's unfortunately, relatively common. I know at least, I know 2 or 3 people who are pretty close to me who have been victims of sexual assault at some point in their life. This is completed or attempted unwanted vaginal, oral, or anal penetration through the use of physical force, threats of violence, or when a victim is under the influence of alcohol or drugs, right? So there's a couple of different elements going on here. This can be something that's happening to someone who's male or female or other, right? It can be completed or attempted, right? This can involve violence. It can involve threats. There's a lot of different pieces going on here. And we sometimes talk about 4 different types of rape, or we can categorize these 4 different types: stranger, acquaintance, date, and statutory. And this would be a great short answer question. I love these lists of 4 for you on exams. But stranger rape this is somebody who you don't know, right? It's a stranger. It's somebody who is unfamiliar to you. The most common is not a stranger, right? That's kind of tends to be what people think. But the most common is actually number 2, right? An acquaintance, somebody who you know. Maybe it's not someone you know well, but it could be a friend. It could even be somebody that you in your family, though that technically that might fall in a different category we'll talk about later. But this is someone that's known to you. Most of the time, this is somebody who knows you, maybe not well, but they're familiar to you rather than being a stranger. Date rape would be someone that you're on a date with, right? That you are dating or in a romantic relationship with. And statutory rape, person under the age of consent. We talked a little bit about pedophilia, and we'll come back to that a little bit more in this chapter. But the idea here is that they're not old enough, right? They're under 18, so they're not old enough to give their consent. And I want to spend a few minutes talking a little bit more about consent. This is something that's a really important concept in this chapter. Consent is a conscious mind and body alignment of both partners. Both parties agreeing to having sex. Both parties have willingness or excitement to engage in intimacy or sexual intercourse. There's a lot of elements to consent, right? And typically, and this is the case in California, consent in California is at the age of 18. So you have to be 18 years old, technically, in order to give your consent. Now, a lot of people engage in sexual activity before 18, and it isn't as big of a deal when both people are like 17 or both people are 16. But if you have one person who's like 18 or 19 and one who's under 18, it can start to get tricky. You might actually end up in a situation where they can file charges of statutory rape. Doesn't happen very often, but both people technically have to be over the age of 18. Anyone have any, there's a couple of things that can get in the way of consent that can cause somebody to not be able to give it. We've talked about at least one of them. Anyone have any guesses? What are some things that could interfere with your ability to consent? Any thoughts? Any guesses? Yeah. Alcohol, that's a really common one. Technically, if somebody is drunk or under the influence of alcohol or drugs, right, they're not able to give their consent. Yeah. Yeah, their emotional state, they could be compromised in some way, right? So maybe they've been threatened or they're in a compromised emotional state. Age is another really big one, as we just said, where you have to be over 18. Being unconscious, obviously, would mean that you can't give your consent, right? Sometimes people who are engaging in like drinking too much, somebody might pass out. If they're not conscious, they can't give their consent. Intimidation or fear, being threatened or forced, any kind of violence. A little video that I want to play for you. It's the same person who did the paraphilias video. I feel like at times it's a little cringy, but I think it's got great content in it, so I will play it for you anyway. But she does a good job of kind of talking about what consent is and what it can look like, right? So giving you some kind of verbal and nonverbal cues as to what consent can look like. So I'll play this for you. I think it's kind of helpful. It's a little awkward, but I do think I love the verbal and nonverbal cues that she gives you examples of. I think they're really important. And this is something that has gained a lot of discussion in the last couple of years, the idea of consent culture. I've seen signs all over this building. There's signs all over the place about consent 101. There was a whole thing that was put on about this in last semester. And so this is something that's really important. And there are some barriers to consent, which she talked about, like age, or being inebriated with alcohol or the use of drugs. Also, when somebody holds power over you, as she mentioned, but really important to get consent from someone verbally, right? As she said, sex is an intentional act. When somebody is deprived of their consent, that's when we're in this realm of what we're talking about in this chapter, right? Different types of sexual assaults, including the 4 different types of rape that are up here on this slide. In terms of prevalence and characteristics, prevalence is really, really difficult to get, right? It's very difficult to get accurate statistics on how frequently something like rape is occurring, right? I have some statistics from 2015, which are getting a little bit old here, but you can see quite a few cases of rape in 2015 being reported. A lot of people don't report incidents of rape. What might somebody not report being raped? What are some reasons somebody might not want to report it? Can you think of any? Yeah. Yeah, so the fact that it might not lead to any kind of consequence, right? The consequences for rape are sadly not all that intense, right? For something that can cause lifelong trauma for somebody. Yeah.
Persecution, so like an attacker might attack them.
Yeah. Yeah, right. If you tell anyone, I'll come back and hurt you. I'll hurt somebody that you know. I'll come for you. It's very, very common. Yeah.
There's typically like shame associated.
Yeah, but a lot of shame or guilt, maybe thinking that you had some part in it in some way, or not wanting other people to know. Did you have a different one, or was that? Yeah. Yeah, maybe not sufficient evidence, or not wanting to go through the process of having to go and get a rape kit. So if somebody is sexually assaulted and they go to the police to report it, they will collect all that evidence. So she talked about a rape kit, right? So typically collecting evidence, right, to try and have enough, like physical evidence in order to press charges, right? It's a very emotionally traumatic thing to do after already suffering something traumatic. A lot of people are embarrassed or ashamed, and the other reasons that you mentioned. So the statistics on this are quite low, even more so for men than women. Now, men can be raped as well. It's not nearly as common, but it definitely does occur. And men tend to report it even less so than women do, because of the stereotypes and kind of things that we expect of men to be strong, right? Or how were you raped, right? What do you mean you weren't in the mood, right? Like some of those stereotypes that come with being male or being masculine mean that it's even more underreported for men. In terms of some other kind of elements here, the media plays a role in this for sure, right? So we have a lot of cultural norms that are perpetuated through the media, right? So sexually violent films and books, the norms in pornography, typically in pornography, right? There's a lot of like sexual assault and rape. You just keep harassing the person until they say yes or till they give in, right? And so those norms being perpetuated by the media don't help. Characteristics of rapists in general, right now, there is no typical person who commits this crime, but it tends to be more about power and domination and control than sex, right? So that is something that traditionally we talk about a lot. This is much more about power and dominating someone than it is about sexuality. Typically, this tends to be a single male between the ages of 15 and 30. Traditionally, again, it's somebody that you know. A few other trends, this tends to be someone who is maybe self-centered or narcissistic, has an exaggerated sense of self-importance, someone who might be violent in nature, right? But this could be anyone. Most traditionally, it's heterosexual men between the ages of 15 and 30, but it really could be anyone. And the most common victims are women, younger women between the ages of 16 to 24, right? But again, this can occur from anyone and to anyone, sadly. Date rape drugs are very commonly used as part of an act of rape. Really interesting. I just read this whole thing. I should have saved the website. I'll see if I can find it later. I just saw this whole article on this nail polish that you can put on that will detect. There's a couple of these that have been around for a while, but there's this new product and it's really inexpensive because they're trying to make it available, where you can paint this nail polish on and it's actually clear, right? So anyone in theory could use it, and you can put your finger into a drink and it'll turn color. If there's any of these drugs in the drink, something that's gaining a lot of popularity because again, these drugs are used so commonly. So date rape drugs or any drug that might be used in the context of a sexual assault, these are the most common ones by far. So roofies or rohypnol, which tends to cause a lot of memory loss, right? If you've ever seen the movie The Hangover, right? The whole idea that they like all took roofies and they don't remember anything for 24 hours. That's fairly common with this drug. So in addition to causing someone to be very tired and sedated, it also causes memory loss. And because of that combination, it tends to be something that is slipped into a drink, right? And people don't see it, they don't detect it. And then they start to get sleepy. And that's when somebody might swoop in and whisk them away or take advantage of them. GHB, Special K, alcohol, or ketamine hydrochloride. But there's a bunch of these different drugs. The idea behind all of them is they cause a lot of sleepiness and sedation and memory loss, which again, tends to be something that correlates very strongly with the act of rape, especially at like a party. There's a lot of tips for covering your drink or never accepting drinks from people you don't know. And again, I'll see if I can find it later, but it was a link to this newer, pretty effective like nail polish that would allow you to detect these in a drink, which is gaining a lot of popularity. So obviously something like being sexually assaulted by anyone, right, whatever of the types that we're talking about, can lead to some serious like aftermath. This is a very traumatic event. It can lead to something like PTSD. A little more specific, we call this rape trauma syndrome, right? It's a form of PTSD, but very specific to someone who has been the victim of sexual assault. So what we see is that people tend to have like a two-stage response to something like being sexually coerced or a victim of sexual violence. They go through like an acute phase, the beginning phase, and then something that's a little bit more long-term. The acute phase is when you might have a lot of feelings of like anger or fear or shock, kind of the immediate response that you would have after something traumatic happened. But the bigger thing that a lot of people experience is kind of a long-term reorganization, right? This can cause a lot of things related to your sexuality, related to control. Very common that people who have been sexually assaulted struggle in intimacy with partners later in life, right? They might not do well with any kind of lack of control. They might have certain sexual triggers that you have to be mindful of, right? It can cause a lot of long-term issues. So if somebody that you are in a like sexual or romantic relationship with has been sexually assaulted, it might take some patience, right? This can be something that people do experience some long-term effects of, and it might cause problems in like your sexual interactions together. You can also see something called traumatic sexualization. If children are sexually assaulted, right, it can lead to kind of increased amount of like sexual play and masturbation, like inappropriate sexuality in children. Children are very commonly engaging in like curious sexual behavior. We didn't talk about this too much earlier, but it's relatively common for kids to play like house or doctor or something and like explore like anatomy with friends or even with family members, cousins, siblings. But what you might see is somebody who's a very hypersexualized child. Typically, that's a big red flag that they've experienced or been exposed to something that was very sexual or maybe even traumatic in nature. So, well, the idea here is that this does have long-term effects. And if somebody has been a victim of some kind of a sexual assault, it's really important to be supportive of them, to believe them. Right? A lot of people don't want to tell anyone because they feel like they're at fault, which we talked about a minute ago. So being supportive, believing them, can I help take you to therapy? Can I support you in some way? Can I be patient? What are the triggers or things that you don't want me to do that might upset you? And so trying to be supportive and communicate are really important elements of helping somebody to recover from something like this. And probably therapy, things like EMDR, really, really common for traumatic experiences, but there does tend to be quite a bit of an aftermath. Before I move on, any thoughts or comments, questions, anything at all for now? Again, I know not the happiest of topics, but definitely still important. So we talked about this already, but just to revisit it one more time in the context of this chapter, we talked about pedophilia, right? So child molestation, child sexual abuse, incest. So there's a little bit of like a division that we sometimes make here. Child sexual assault is any kind of inappropriate touching or stimulation or even sex with between a child and an adult. Now, this can be pedophilia or incest. So pedophilia or molestation is between an adult and a child who are not related. Incest would be somebody who is related. Okay, so this could be a cousin. This could be an uncle, a father, a mother, a sibling, right? This could be anyone who is related to the individual, right? And again, there's no classic profile for someone who's a pedophile. It often goes underreported. Children might not understand what's happening to them. They might not want to get someone in trouble, right? I don't want to tell my mom that my dad did this because I don't want dad to go to jail, or I don't want dad to get in trouble, or maybe mom won't believe me. Very common things. This is very, very, very underreported, and obviously can be very traumatizing with some long-term consequences. So all of the things that we're talking about in this chapter have the potential for long-term consequences, but definitely childhood sexual abuse, whether it's with a relative or someone who's unknown to you, can be very traumatizing. Did anyone check out the Megan's Law website after we talked in here? Right, a couple of you nodding. Right, I know we talked about it before break, but again, anyone who has been found guilty of any of the things that we're talking about here would be listed on that website as well. So one other really big one, and I had a whole 5-hour, 6-hour training on this actually just like a week or two ago, a couple weeks ago. Sexual harassment is another really big one that falls into this chapter. Any kind of unwanted sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature in the workplace or academic setting. And so a lot of different settings that this can happen in. The idea is it's typically someone who has a power dynamic over you or people that you are working with. And I guarantee many of you have probably been victims of sexual harassment. Maybe it's by a coworker, maybe it's by a teacher, maybe it's by someone who is like a customer. That's very, very common in like being a waitress or a waiter or being any kind of retail job. There's a lot of this that occurs. And there's a couple of different types, but I have a little video I want to play for you. It was a training that I saw not too long ago, and they used dogs instead of people. I'm not sure why. Maybe they thought that made it more approachable, but I thought it was a great example. They show you a couple of different types. Think about that clip as it gives you some examples of a couple of different types of sexual harassment, and it doesn't always have to be blatant, but it can be, right? We tend to divide this up into two different types, right? So quid pro quo sexual harassment, and then hostile work environment. And those are the two main ones that we talk about. And of course, they can occur together. Quid pro quo means that it's like, I do something for you, you do something for me, right? It's kind of the essence behind that. So typically favorable treatment, right? If you perform sexual favors, you'll get that promotion that you've been waiting for. You'll get the A in the class, right? This could be, again, a boss, a coworker, an instructor, right? So you give me something, I give you something back, right? And this is some kind of favorable treatment in exchange for like sexual advances, sexual like compliance of some kind. Hostile work environment is when people make the workplace or academic environment uncomfortable. Hostile, abusive, intolerable. They're saying things that are uncomfortable, creating an environment that you don't feel comfortable being in. Now, obviously, as I said, these occur together, but I imagine a lot of you at some point have had a customer or a coworker, or maybe, I hope not a teacher, but maybe even a teacher has done something to make you feel uncomfortable in a sexual context. And then you have choices as to how you're going to deal with it. But anybody, any stories or comments or thoughts? I often get a lot of stories of people who are like waiters and waitresses being harassed by customers, but just to open it up. Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay, yeah, right, and probably, did it make you uncomfortable or? Yeah, right. And the hard thing, I think, with this is that everybody has a different line, like of what makes them comfortable. Somebody, you might have somebody that you work with that is given that nickname who doesn't care. But if it bothers you, right, then it falls into this, right? Because it makes it uncomfortable for you. Anyone else? Other like stories or thoughts or anything? When I was, I'll tell you a story and then see if you think of anything. But when I was 18, I worked at Yosemite National Park for the summer. I did that a couple of times. One of my favorite things I did when I was younger. I just took off and I worked there all summer long. I basically flipped hamburgers all summer when I was 18. I'm in Curry Village, though it's not called that anymore. But I worked at this little hamburger stand in Yosemite, and my boss was like the biggest pervert ever. And I found it funny. It didn't bother me at all. I have a good sense of humor. I'm hard to offend. But I had coworkers who were very offended by it. But I had this boss who was like in his 50s or 60s. I was 18 at the time. Really heavy, overweight guy, bald. Just painting a picture for you so you can get an image of him. And he would make really inappropriate comments all the time. Definitely doing this. I laughed at them, right? It didn't bother me. He'd be like, I'd be flipping hamburgers and be like, why don't you get in there between the hamburger and the bun? And I'm like, that bun's way too small. I'm never going to fit. Like, I would just make a joke out of it. Like, I didn't think it was anything offensive, but he would constantly make comments about like sexual things all day long. And nobody seemed to mind it. But then we got a new person who came in and she was deeply offended by it, reported him, and he was fired. Right. And so like for months, he got away with doing this and nobody cared because it didn't make anyone uncomfortable. Like every time I'd be like, dude, Chris, you're barking up the wrong tree, man. I'm not going to fit on that bun for one. And for two, I'm not interested in you. Like I had no problem saying that and laughing at it. He said it to somebody else, right? And they were very offended and reported him. So I think that's where the tricky thing with this comes is you just don't know where people's comfort zone is, right? Things like touching a coworker or hugging somebody, right? Those aren't things that you should do without asking for permission or asking if it makes them comfortable. Calling people babe, right? Like he did in the video, right? Some people might not mind that and other people might mind it incredibly, right? So this is something that I think you have to be very aware of in any kind of environment. I don't know, any other like stories, anything come to mind while I was talking about that at all? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And my coworker was just like making frontals, like whatever. And he went up to her and was like, "Can you turn around so I can look at your?" Yeah, it was really awkward.
Yeah,
it was just like get him out.
mm-hmm. But they did kick him out.
Yeah,
that's nice at least.
It was. They were just caught off so hard. Like, they were really shaking them.
Yeah, and it's hard when it's a customer, right? Because I mean, a lot of you. How many of you work in like retail or like customer service related like job, right? A lot of you. So you're always taught, right? The customer's right? You have to treat the customers well. You want them to come back, right? To be kind to customers. But what happens when they're making you uncomfortable and abusing you, right? And it's good that they kicked him out, but sometimes this kind of behavior is just completely overlooked, especially in like service industries where people are, like I said, a waiter or waitress, like having to flirt maybe a little bit to get better tips. Right. But where do you draw the line? Right. This can get really complicated and it tends to be portrayed in a very like typical of that video, right? Like she's kind of uptight, right? Well, she has every right to be uncomfortable, but that tends to be the stereotype. It's somebody who's very like uptight and prudish, but that doesn't obviously have to be the case. I mean, any other like, stories or thoughts? Anything else here before I go to the next slide? If you have something like this come up in like a work environment or a school environment, you have some options, right? So like for me, all I had to do was look at my boss and be like, hey, too far, and he would stop, right? Like, and for me, that worked, right? But for the person that I worked with who was uncomfortable, she didn't feel comfortable saying anything to him. So she went above him, right? And he ended up getting fired, right? So obviously, depending on your comfort level, if you can, the first step is usually to tell somebody, hey, you're making me uncomfortable, right? Maybe they don't know, sometimes people are a little bit oblivious, right? Like, hey, those comments, I don't like them. Like, hey, could you not touch me? Could you not do this, right? And sometimes that's enough to stop it completely. So if you feel comfortable, you can confront the person who's harassing you, right? If you don't, you can obviously discuss it with the supervisor. You can see if other people are having similar problems. When I was in graduate school, and this was a little bit shocking, but we had a professor, I was in my graduate program, there were 12 of us as a group, and we were forced to do group therapy, which is really unethical. You can't force people to do therapy, but we were forced to do group therapy with this instructor related to sex. It was part of like a sex therapy class. And all of us together had this conversation, and all of us went together to the dean. So if you can find support, like if other people are experiencing the same thing as you, if you all go together, there's a strength in that. You can discuss it with coworkers, you can go to a supervisor. There's often phone numbers that you can call to report somebody anonymously. You can obviously file criminal charges if you've been assaulted. There is a whole range, but again, I think if you feel comfortable, it's always better to first say, hey, you're going a little too far, I don't like that, and see if somebody backs off, right? I had to do this with a student once, right? I had a student once who would always like say my name really inappropriately and then find ways to touch me, right? And I would kept having to tell her, I'm like, could you please like not do that, right? And like, she thought it was funny, right? And I had to go tell my supervisor because I was worried that somehow it would come back in like a bad way. But I talked to her first, right? If you can, it's always best to talk to an individual first, whenever it's safe or possible. And then you can obviously go up the chain and escalate from there. The last type of coercion in this chapter is intimate partner violence. So this used to be called domestic violence, but now we call it intimate partner violence. A pattern of coercive behavior designed to exert power and control over a person in an intimate relationship through the use of intimidation, threats, or harmful or harassing behavior. Very, very common. Intimate partner violence is very common, and it's very cyclical in nature, right? This tends to be something that follows a very distinct pattern, right? And what you tend to see is there'll be some kind of incident of abuse, right? So maybe it's violence, maybe it's like a physical violence or sexual violence or emotional violence. There's some abusive event. And then what happens is the person who perpetrated that feels remorse or guilt. They feel bad, right? So this is a partner, somebody that you're in a relationship with. They get a little heated, they maybe hit you or throw something at you or do something inappropriate, and then they feel bad afterward, right? Some remorse and guilt, which leads to a lot of like sweet, like loving behavior, maybe gifts, apologies, promises, I'll never do it again. It was a one-time thing. Buying flowers as an apology, being on your best behavior for a period of time, right? And then what happens is there's some kind of environmental trigger, this wears off, and then they go back and they have this like abuse again. So it's just this constant like cycle that happens where people get into this pattern. And when people are in this stage of like, oh, I feel bad, and they're being really kind, partners have a very hard time leaving that individual. It's like, oh, well, he didn't mean to do it, or she didn't mean to do it. It was a one-time thing. They feel bad. Look at all the kind things that they're doing, but then it happens again, right? And so people get stuck in this loop or this kind of cycle of violence, and oftentimes have a hard time leaving someone who is maybe, being violent against them, either physically or emotionally or sexually. So it's oftentimes this pattern rather than more of like an isolated incident, right? It could be a one-time thing that somebody learns from and like never does again, but it does tend to be something that like kind of follows a pattern that's very, very typical with intimate partner violence. And I have a song. I posted this. I told you we were going to listen to this at some point, but I have a song and a video that I'm going to play for you that I think is really representative of an abusive relationship. You could say the whole song and video is, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this song for you, and then I'm going to have you get into groups and look at the lyrics a little bit and kind of we'll talk about it a little bit together. But it's the "Love the Way You Lie" by Eminem, and I'll play the video and everything with it as well. The video is just as descriptive as the song is.
Yeah. Manipulation.
So like.
Yeah.
Same more times each time we sing her. Maybe they're just. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I have some. Yeah. You definitely have one. I like mine. So.
Yeah.
Sure. Based on your own. Like it shows.
Yeah. It's still.
Sorry.
So again, you had to highlight some of the specific lyrics and examples and stuff, right?
Yeah. I don't. People compare.
Yeah, what's up?
I can almost like tomorrow.
Yeah.
Do we have to, that's the day we turn in the movie sheet, right? The questionnaire.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about it, and then I'm gonna collect it.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and if you need another copy, it is on the
Okay.
announcements.
I
and
just,
everything.
yeah, I'm done filling.
Cool. Yeah, we're gonna get like a list going. Talk about it more. Yeah. I think a few more minutes, and again, feel free to write on the lyric part as well, and make sure you write all of your names on there, so you are hearing music, everyone you're hearing.
Oh, it's like a, yeah, I'll show you. Yeah, it's doing. That's. Bad at all, you know, it's all.
Okay.
Please come back. Because we need to me. That's it. I think that means in general.
So take just another like minute or two, then we can talk about it together, maybe like 2 more minutes.
It's not really. Always.
No, it's great.
Or does anyone need more time? Just like another minute or so. More. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about it. And if you're still writing, that's totally fine. You can keep writing. So again, obviously we can say the whole video and the whole song, right? I think all the lyrics and the whole video and song are obviously represented. But does anyone, before I collect these, does anyone have any like specific lyrics or specific things from the video, things that stood out to you? That might be a really good example of some of this. What are some of the things you came up with? What do you think? Right, it could be a lyric, it could be something from the video, but what's something that's you wrote down? Yeah.
Sincerity was talking to her, and that seems like coercion.
Okay. Sure. Okay. Yeah, definitely. Trying to coerce her into staying. Right. You definitely see some of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So I have this moment of like violence, right? And then like apologizing, giving her a gift, right? Like, and you see things like really good, then really bad, then really good, then really bad throughout the video and the lyrics. Anything else? What are some other things you wrote down? Again, it could be a lyric or it could be from the video. What else do you? A couple more things before I collect them.
Yeah, with like making like promises.
Yeah.
Like trying to memorize the nudge cycle.
Yeah, you definitely see that cycle, right? Where he like makes promises and like it's just a broken record, right? Like the whole thing is like repeating over and over again, making these promises and then going back and doing the same behavior. Anything else? Yeah.
But your temper's just as bad as much.
Sure.
So the same. Tries to be her responsible for his behavior.
Yeah, interesting, right? And you see it a little bit on both sides, but they both being very like kind of hot-headed and the line between like passion and anger sometimes can be a little blurred. I think they accomplish that quite well here. Yeah.
Right. That it talks about what happens when a tornado comes out, when you see that thing, like, hey, maybe this is just like a normal relationship.
Yeah.
I really love each
Mm-hmm.
other. This is fine.
Right, like almost not seeing the problem, right? Like you just have to.
There's so much that.
Yeah. Right, and there's a stereotype in our culture, right? Or you've all maybe either seen it, heard it, or experienced it of the like makeup sex, right? Where like couples get in like a violent fight and then they have like angry / passionate sex afterward to make up, right? And so you see this like passion between the two of them that it gets very heated in a good way and a bad way, and you see that kind of interplaying in between the lyrics. Did you have a thought as well?
Yes. Say ever with somebody is barely.
Mhm.
Them is kind of like a kind of like love and abuse kind of blurring almost.
Yeah. Yeah, right. I could see that for sure. And you could even take that in a different way too, of like the beginning, like can't breathe when you're with them, and then later, like you're getting sick of looking at them, like you can't even stand them, right? It's this really interesting cycle. And I think this song gets at it really well. So does the video. Obviously, they're on fire, right? Like everything's on fire in the video. That's very like symbolically, portraying this relationship between the two of them. And there's a lot of movies that highlight this. There are a lot of songs that highlight this. This is something that a lot of people struggle with. And they get stuck in this cycle. They're either afraid to leave or they're like, oh, they feel bad and I can't go. Right. And so oftentimes people do get trapped in these cycles like a broken record for quite a bit of time. Anything else before I collect these from you? Again, the whole thing, right? But anything else? All right, you want to make sure your first and last names are on there. I'll collect them in just a moment. I want to take the last few minutes that we have just to quickly, and I'll probably remind you of this every day from here on out, just because we don't have very many days left. But I wrote up on the board, right? So if you're looking at the syllabus, right? So we have today and Wednesday and Monday, and then next Wednesday is our final exam. It's the last regular day of class. And then after that starts finals week, right? So we're having our exam on the last regular day of class because I know a lot of people travel, right? And I will be here on the day of the final if you want to go over your grade and get it or like discuss anything. So I'll be here, but we won't have like class. I'll be here if anyone wants to come in and talk about anything related to your grade or anything with the exam. But that will be our last day of class, and it's your exam online. So I just wanted to point that out so you can start thinking about it if you haven't already. So next Wednesday, you'll take that exam. It's just the third test. If you're on Canvas, which I brought up right here, under modules, thinking hard here, you can see the third study guide right here. So everything that you need to know for the exam, if it's on the study guide, make sure you've prepared it. If it's not, you don't need to worry about it. So that is coming up next Wednesday. And it will be on everything since the last exam, since exam number 2. The other thing that you'll have due that day is a closing assignment. And I mentioned this a few minutes ago, and since we have a few minutes, I'll just talk about it now. If you click on the closing assignment on here, this is something that is also due that same Wednesday by 11:59 p.m. It's worth 25 points. So please don't skip this, right? That's more than a participation. Obviously less than an exam, but about the same as a homework assignment. So you want to make sure that you're getting those points. What you're going to be doing, and you'll submit this right here on Canvas, is you're going to go back and think about 5 specific things from this class that you can apply to your life in some way. Now, I hope it's more than 5, but I want you to at least come up with 5 of them. And what you're going to do is it's not a paper necessarily. It doesn't follow like an essay format. Guys are right. I know you're excited about your earphone, right? I don't blame you, but so what you're going to do is you're going to have 5 different concepts. So think back on any term or concept that we covered throughout the course of the semester. Maybe something in the STI unit was really memorable for you, and it's going to stick with you because it made an impact, right? So you would give me the term or the concept, you'll define it, and then you'll tell me how you can apply it to your life in some way. So you're literally going to follow like, I don't have it on here, but you're going to follow like a 5 example format. You'll give me the term and concept, the definition and application, and then you'll do it again 4 more times. So there don't have to be transitions. It's not a paper. You're writing probably about a paragraph for each one. It should be about 2 pages in total. And I just want you to think of 5 things from the semester. So maybe look at the syllabus or kind of flip back through your notes. Think of anything that stood out to you. And then those are the things you might want to write about. So this will be due on Wednesday the 7th. You'll submit it here online. And it's basically 5 points per topic. So there's 5 of them. Each one is worth 5 points. And that's how you get the 25. So again, I'm looking for like a specific term or concept. You'll define it. You can copy that directly from the book or the lecture. And then this is where the points come in, right? I want you to tell me how you can use this to make sense of something that happened, how it could guide you in your life in some way, something where you can apply that information to your life. Okay. And that's my way of having you do a cumulative element without giving you a cumulative exam. Okay. And again, you'll turn it in right here. Right, start assignment. Are there any questions about this or about the test or any of that stuff? Again, both of these things will be due by Wednesday next week. I'll remind you probably every day, and I'll see if you have questions. But as we get toward the end, I just want to make sure you know what is left. Again, please do take a moment at some point this week to check your grade on Canvas. Right, click on this little grades tab right here. And you can see what your scores are. If anything's missing or looks wrong, now is a great time to let me know. And if you want to turn in something like a homework assignment that you didn't finish, now would be a good time to do that. But be thinking about this, be thinking about the exam. And then before you leave, make sure you turn in your sheet with your names on it. And then on Wednesday, we'll move on to chapter 18. So make sure you turn that in before you go, and then I'll see you all later. Thank you.
Here's my photo.
Oh, nice. Did you crochet that? Yeah. That's pretty impressive. Oh, nice. Okay, so I'll hold on to it and then just don't let me forget to give it back to you, maybe on like Wednesday or something. But that's super cute, actually. Right? I'm like the cutest like uterus.
You make them
Really?
well, and I give them as Christmas gifts and everybody goes.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Can you imagine putting that in someone's stocking? Great, thank you. And then here's the ones that. Okay.
What?